Hello and welcome to my little tutorial on how to use this piece of software I've written for making e-liquid recipes. Now hopefully you've managed to install it and get it working okay. Apologies if you haven't. I haven't actually tested this on any other computers yet, but I think it's just a case of unzipping it and running the exe file to bring up this window. Now obviously it's blank, we haven't got any recipes, so the first thing we want to do is create a recipe. This button here is the new recipe button and it brings up the new recipe window. Now this is looking pretty bare and barren at the minute, but as you add in your flavorings over time, they'll get stored in the database and you'll have all your list of all the flavorings you've used in the past that you can choose from. But obviously, since this is the first time, we're going to have to add it all in manually, and we're going to make a hot chocolate recipe. Hot chocolate. Give it an icon, and this little plus here next to flavorings adds in a new flavour that you've not used before. The first one we're going to do is, what's this? Chocolate caramel from Decadent Vapors. Chocolate caramel, and the base is the liquid that it's the flavourings mixed with. We'll come to that later. It's not terribly important. Most of them are mixed with PG. Generally, you should normally just select PG. You can select unknown if you don't know, but it's okay. So we'll add that there, and that appears in this little window. If we double click on that, that will put it into the recipe at 100%, and then let's add another one. Next we're going to do some marshmallow. And this one's for my Perfumes Apprentice. Make it pink, and there we go, with a little pink icon. And we're going to put in, what's the other thing I was going to put in this? Oh yeah, hazelnut. And again we'll add that in. Now you can see we've got the percentages, but this is all flavouring now. We're going to want some nicotine. So up here it says nicotine base, again the little plus next to nicotine base, and we can add in some nicotine containing liquid. Now I'm using 36 milligrams nicotine from 4 drops. So give it a description, 36 milligrams, and mine is mixed with VG. Again, you'll only have to add that in once. For subsequent recipes that'll already be there. Double click that and that puts it into your recipe. Now we can start to play around with these percentages. You'll notice that as you increase 1%, the other ones all go down. And that's great, but it's not ideal if you're trying to mix small percentages of recipes with each other. So what we're going to do is padlock. I mean, if you padlock something, then that means that when you move the others, you can see as I'm moving this marshmallow down, hazelnut and nicotine are moving, but the chocolate isn't because I padlocked it. You can move the chocolate, but it won't move automatically when you move the others. So it's a good idea to padlock your flavourings and then leave everything else unpadlocked, because that means you can fine tune these. Let's have 5% marshmallow, bring that down to 3, and 1% hazelnut. That will give us 91% nicotine, 36 milligrams, which, as it's telling us here, is pretty high. You can see it's calculated here the nicotine content of 32.8 milligrams, which is indeed pretty high. So we're going to add in some PG from our bulk liquids. There's no plus button next to bulk liquids, mainly because I thought you'd only ever need VG, PG, vodka and water. If you put in other stuff in your mixes, then it's not for me to judge, but probably you shouldn't be. Okay, let's increase the PG, and you can see again, because we've got these 3 padlocked, it's only the nicotine 36 milligrams that's coming down when I increase this. And again, obviously the nicotine content's going down as well, because now there's only 62.9% nicotine 36 in. So that's fine. We want to get this down to a nice sort of 12-13 milligrams, I think. There we go. Now that's good. That will be a good recipe, except this banner here. This is the banner that tells you what your sort of bulk liquid mix is. We've got our nicotine's based in VG, so that's 36%, and then the rest of them, all the flavourings and our PG, are PG. Now I want more VG in that, so what I'm going to do is lock this nicotine and then add in some VG as well. And you can see as I'm increasing the VG, it's moving the slider here for the left, but it's not moving the nicotine content. The nicotine content's locked because we locked our nicotine here, and this is the only thing in the whole thing that contains nicotine. So we can play around with these two as much as we like, and we're going to have our nicotine content locked and our flavourings locked. So let's go to about there. That's about right. Get rid of that 0.1. Make that 25. Right, and then that's my recipe pretty much done. Click OK, and it will pop up in your recipes box over here. Now again, you can view this. You can actually make changes to it after you've already made it. So for example, you want to put a little bit more marshmallow in, and then save that. But instead of making changes to the recipe you've already got, you can actually create a new revision for each recipe. So say for example you wanted to make this and you weren't entirely happy with it and you wanted to try it with a bit more marshmallow, but you didn't want to lose your original one that you'd done. What you do is go to File, New Revision, and that saves it as Rev2. So now we can play around with Rev2, add some more chocolate, take some marshmallow away, and save it. And that's now saved there as Rev2, whereas Rev1 is still what we put in there. And you can give these star ratings if you like, give them some notes. This is better. And give the other one a lower star rating because it wasn't very good. So that's your recipes done there. We'll just do another quick one, just so you can see we've got more than one. We'll just call this one marshmallow on its own. Might not be particularly nice, but we'll try this anyway. There's some marshmallow, some nicotine, and some PG. Put that at 5%. Okay. Okay, so now I've got chocolate and marshmallow. Now the next stage is obviously to get the mixing right and the actual milliliters you want, because obviously 1% is all well and good, but you need to know how much to put in. So that's why I've got this button here called Make Mix. Now whichever revision you selected, this will be the one you're making, so we'll select Rev2 and we'll go to Make Mix, and that brings up this window here. The only thing you really need to change on this is the milliliters. So if for example you want to make 10 milliliters, you can see here it's calculated that 10 milliliters, 1% will be 0.1 milliliters of hazelnut, 3%, and so on down here. Now that's all well and good. You can change, if you click on this button here, you can change this between milliliters, drops, and hybrid, which we'll come to later, and it basically calculates exactly the same thing. You'll notice though that some of these, if we go down to very low sort of milliliters, these do start to get cropped, and that's because of this setup page I've got here. I've got this set so that my smallest measure in milliliters is 0.05. Now what that means is that it will round this figure here to the nearest, or actually we'll either round it up or down or to the nearest, 0.05 milliliters. That's because I'm using syringes, and even though they've got a scale that goes to 0.01 milliliters, I don't really fancy playing around with that. It's a bit difficult, so I generally just mix to sort of 0.05, mix big enough batches, it's not going to be a big problem. But of course you can bring this down. If you bring this down to 0.1, then you see that this is actually 0.03, but it's rounded it up to 0.05. Another thing to note is these small percentages here. When it has rounded your recipe for you, you'll see these change, and that will be the actual percent that it is. So if we go back to measuring this to 0.05, as we were before, you'll notice that this has been rounded up to 0.05, and it's telling you that by telling you that actually, instead of having 1% hazelnut, we've got 1.6% hazelnut. Now that's a bit geeky, and at higher sort of volumes that doesn't matter, that will level out to 1% once you go sort of high enough, but if you care, there it is. The other thing, oh yeah, of course, if you bring it down too low, then 1%, you can't, it rounds down to 0. What I could do there is actually round up instead of round nearest, and that will round it up, and then we've got 2.3%. So again, it's sort of, you can play around with this, and I've tried to give you as much information as possible. Use your own judgment, I suppose. Another thing to note is the drops setting. So when you're on drops, again on this setup page, we've got this drops per milliliter. Now people say that using drops isn't as accurate, and technically it's not true, but you need to get your drops sort of measured properly. So the best thing to do is whatever you're using to drop, put a milliliter in it, count the number of drops that come out, do that a few times, take an average. My average is 30 because I was using it straight from the dropper bottles you get from flavour companies. But again, you can change that to whatever you want it to be, and then that will give you you're measuring drops. And again, drops rounds just the same way the other one does. So if you go down to here, 3 milliliters, one drop. One drop isn't actually 1% of 3 milliliters, it's actually 1.1%. So it's telling you here what the real percentages would be once you've done all your rounding. But again, you know, when you get to higher drops, these all sort of level out and it's actually okay. The last thing to mention is this hybrid mode. Now this is something I use when you want to put the small things in drops but the larger things in milliliters. So what that does is it uses this hybrid drops threshold setting so that if it's over 100 drops it will convert it into milliliters and you can use a pipette or something. So basically if we're doing sort of 10 milliliters or even 5, then our flavorings we're going to do in drops, and then the nicotine, oh actually put that down to about 50. Yeah, the flavorings we're going to do in drops, and the nicotine we're going to put in 1.75 milliliters from a normal 1 milliliter pipette. So that's that. Play around with that as much as you like. Hopefully it's all right. If you don't want any of this rounding going on, then you can just put this down to 0.01, which is the resolution of this anyway. So, you know, this is a 0.01 resolution, and then that'll give you the most accurate readings you can do, really. These checkboxes don't do anything. I was using them for when you're actually making the mix. I was using those to check off what I put in as I was going. So I didn't accidentally put marshmallow in twice or something ridiculous like that. But they don't do anything, they're just there so you can use them as a sort of visual reference of what you put in and what you haven't put in. So if we click OK on this, we've made this mix. The only last thing to mention is once you've made something, it pops up into this little previous mixes bottle down here. That doesn't really do anything, but it can be useful for bringing up the sort of the last few things you made. You know, if you're something you're working on at the minute, then it's down here in the window. It also might be useful if you put something into steep and you want to remember when you made it, so you know how long it's been steeping for. This little 0 days, that'll increment for every day. You can take it out there by right clicking and selecting remove, and that will take it from your previous mixes list. So then you've got a kind of collection. Once you have loads and loads like I do, that might be quite useful. That you can show with this show mixes, that shows and hides this little box down here, because you don't really need to use that. You'll be forgiven for not caring about that. That's fine. One last thing to mention is the submixes. You'll notice when I went to this new recipe, I completely ignored this pre-mixes section. This is for putting one batch into another batch. So for example, if you've made your hot chocolate recipe over here and it was great and you loved it, but then you get a cold or something and you want to try your hot chocolate with menthol or something in it, or peppermint, what you can do is make your new one. We'll call it peppermint chocolate. Add a new flavour in for peppermint, and instead of adding all the bases and stuff, you can actually, if you click show all, you can actually find your hot chocolate R2, which is revision 2, and add that in. Now what that will do is calculate everything else for you using the ingredients that were in hot chocolate rev 2. So say you just want 1% peppermint, 99% hot chocolate R2, you can see by the picture here that it's put everything else in from hot chocolate R2, and it's given you nicotine content of 12.3 milligrams per milliliter. So there it is, and then when you come to make your peppermint hot chocolate R2, it will tell you to put in a certain amount of peppermint and a certain amount of the original hot chocolate mix that you had. So that's a kind of submix. The last thing to mention on that is this little mark as submix button. All that does is makes it so that if you click that, then it pops up in this premixes box without you having to click show all. It's not a big deal, but I use it because generally when I'm making mixes, I'll make like a bulk liquid, which is unflavoured, and it's just got a few of these sorts of things in it. About sort of 40% of that, a bit more of that sort of thing. And that'd be my bulk liquid, and I'll mark that as a submix, so that when I come to make something else, instead of having to put in all the ingredients manually, I can have something here like, let's have custard, and I'll add in whatever my flavourings are and then my bulk liquid, like that. But again, you know, you might not mix like that. That's completely up to you. But it's just something to bear in mind. So that's what your premixes are for, putting one thing into something else. I think that's pretty much everything I've bothered to make on this piece of software. But if you have any more suggestions, my email address is under help and about. And let me know, and don't spam me with too much stuff. See you there.